sports TV viewers are skewing older, but sports habits are changing all the time. And how evident is it? Kyle Scott, crossingbroad.com, runs a website, podcasts, and I'm assuming that since he started his website, which started out as a website, that is evolving as sports are changing. Sports TV viewing habits are changing. So Kyle joins us now on 97.3 ESPN because I'm really interested, Kyle, to see from your perspective, who does most of your stuff online, you do podcasting, how the sports fan in what you do has changed. Because I certainly know in what I do it changed, and now we're seeing, and on what television does, it has certainly changed a lot.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I kind of wish I was caller 9. That sounds like a pretty good deal you guys have going, by the way.
Next hour. Next hour, man.
All right, I'll call back. Yeah, no, for me, it's definitely changing. I don't think anyone actually has the answers on what is the right thing to do, and I think everyone's struggling with it a little bit. People, not only can they watch stuff anywhere and however they want, but the habits of sitting down and watching a game are changing. People are relying on highlights and clips and following players, not as much as teams, especially now that our teams are not good, and Philly even has to be a little more inventive. So you were right when you said Crossing Broad started out as a website. It still, of course, is a website, but I'm trying to figure out the best ways to graft that onto other online platforms, whether that's social media or our podcast, Crossing Broadcast. And it's not just about tweeting words. It's like, hey, what can we make for social media that people will be interested in? What can we say on YouTube or on our podcast that people will be interested in? And then the step 2 is figuring out how to, make money with that, usually through advertising.
See, what I'm interested in, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, Kyle, your blog is obviously very popular, and the podcast does very well. The average age of an NBA fan on television is 42. I don't know if you have the details or the numbers, but if you guys do a Sixers podcast, do you know the average age of people who are consuming? Because I got to imagine the Sixers have a very skewing younger audience based on what they've done and the divide that there is between Sixers fans. So the NBA being the youngest, 42 still seems to be older for what that league brings to the table.
Yeah, it does seem to be a little bit older than you would expect. I know it's the youngest of the leagues. And certainly baseball is up in the 50s. I forget the exact number.
57.
Yeah, so they have some problems. I can't see on an individual. I know what our audience is. 60% of our audience is between about 27 and 32. I mean, it's late 20s, early 30s, and our podcast audience, I'd say, is right around there. You're always sort of estimating these things. There's not the best tracking for that. But, for us, it really differs. Our audience is pretty consistent, both on the website and certainly the podcast. So I don't think it really changes based upon what we're talking about. But my sense is, that you're 100% right. The Sixers crowd is definitely younger. People, I'm 33. I always say kind of like my age and younger is super receptive to the process stuff, the tanking stuff. We're kind of an entire generation of people who grew up, with the exception of maybe 3 of those years around Allen Iverson, without a basketball team that ever even thought about contending. And it's like we're all sort of like, sure, let's take 5 years and rebuild this thing for a chance to become great. It's worth it. So the Sixers audience definitely skews the youngest and most progressive of the local audiences, for sure.
I feel, Kyle, like I'm an anomaly. I'm a 40-year-old man who is a strong supporter of the process. Like, I get, hammered here because I get, older people who think I'm like the Antichrist because like the Sixers are paying me or something. But I, for some reason, I find that they are, look, and it could have blown up in their face if they don't take Embiid, and Embiid stinks. We know that could have gone down. It's all about getting the right guy. That we know. But NFL, average age, 50. Is that something that's concerning for the sports in general, what you do, what we all do, that NFL drives a lot of us? I mean, that's paying a lot of our bills, NFL, and to see that 50, they've got some issues. And one thing the NBA does, I think that the NFL lacks, is the social media aspect has legs for the NBA. I think the NFL's better open their eyes to that.
Yeah, it is. In fact, this is exactly what we talked about on our podcast today. It was like, the NFL is so huge. I'm always not super willing to like write them off as being done. There's a long way to go. The NFL still has a lot of power and a lot of interest, and it's going to be a very slow burn if there's a decline there. I think what they got to navigate though is they've always relied on the brand, the shield of the NFL, and the passionate provincial fan bases. But I think what you're seeing, especially with basketball and what you're talking about, is the NBA more than any other sports league, maybe hockey too, but they're kind of a 1A sport, is they allowed people for years now to share stuff online, to share their video content, to share highlights, LeBron James, Steph Curry, put it anywhere they want. And for years, football and baseball, particularly NFL, Major League Baseball, were like super draconian about that stuff and took stuff down, didn't allow that sort of organic stuff to bubble up. And as a result, the NBA is already kind of a player star-driven league. You really get these personalities, these players people are able to identify with and become fans of, even if they're not watching full games. And the NBA allowed their personalities to shine. They allow Russell Westbrook to be Russell Westbrook. They allow Steph Curry to, kind of do his hot dog antics on the floor. I guess catching some flack for last night. The NFL tried to remove that from the game and strip it of personality. And, it loses a little authenticity when you do that. And not to mention their games are 3.5 hours long. And for both them and baseball, it's a challenge. Like, how do we get young people to sit down and watch an entire game? It's tough.
Kyle Scott, crossingbroad.com, is with us as we're looking at how the TV audiences and sports consumption is changing. I think sports consumption is big. As you said, your blog, now you're podcasting. I'm sure you are probably thinking of other things that you can do to attract people to your site. How about the way that these leagues are going to be consumed 3 to 5 years down the road with all the streaming services, everybody cutting the cord, ratings are down. We saw what happened at ESPN. When you look at the big picture of sports, how big of a fear is that for people who work in the sports industry?
The thing that stands out to me, games will just slowly progress over to streaming services. And there are services now like PlayStation View and YouTube Live. They get most of the sports channels. I watch a lot of sports that I would have watched on TV a year ago on my phone with YouTube Live. So all that stuff is fine. I think where the concern comes in is in like the early 2020s, the NBA and NFL specifically, and a lot of sports rights deals are coming up. And the last round of these deals, 3-4 years ago, the ESPNs of the world, the CBSs, the TNTs bid billions for NBA and NFL rights. And part of the reason they bid so much more than they had previously, part of it is the success of sports, but part of it is that live sports is really kind of the one thing holding up the traditional cable model. So that money these networks paid to the leagues is why you're seeing guys like Kyle Lowry might wind up with $35 million a year contracts. That money goes to the teams and the players. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to see different people bidding on those rights in a few years. You might see Amazon bidding. They already have some NFL rights, but you're going to see them bidding on the Monday Night Football or the Sunday game. You're going to see maybe YouTube or Apple or Netflix. Although they said they don't want to get in sports. They actually said they don't want to get in sports, but we'll see. But what those are all kind of healthy businesses. And while they have a lot of money, and I have no doubt that Amazon can broadcast a football game and have you press a button to buy the guy's jersey and deliver it to you before the end of the game, which I don't think is actually that far-fetched. Those companies don't need sports to exist. So I think they're going to make much more measured bids and not going to be able to just throw money because they need sports to exist. And I think what will happen is the leagues will get less money, and this whole sports environment we all exist in, will change because it's not going to be fully backed by these huge networks and stuff. I don't think it's going away, but I think it will be different. And it feels like there's a little bit of a bubble there, especially in terms of like league revenue and salaries.
Kyle Scott with us from Crossing Broad. I find it ironic, Kyle, it's not a major sport, but MLS or Major League Soccer was actually the lowest number of average age of TV viewers in 2016. That was 40. That's 10 years below what the NFL is. The whole talk about concussions and whether you let your kids
I find this one to be really interesting. The soccer.
Does that have a factor, and are you surprised to see the soccer that low a number?
No, not at all. I mean, I think the concussions is a good point. I mean, I have a 1.5-year-old, and I decided before he was born that he wasn't going to play football for that reason. If how much of it that has an effect on MLS viewership, I don't know. I'm sure a little bit. And as kids get older, not playing, less kids playing football. However, I think what you're seeing is, and the guy Russ, who I do the show with, is big into soccer and feels this way, and I do it to an extent. You get, and I think there's a lot of people younger who have an appreciation for like the European soccer, who can watch the English Premier League or the Champions League on NBC or Fox, and have access to it on weekends and go to the bar and go to soccer bars and watch this stuff. And it's a pretty good product. Like, it's kind of tough to get into, but once you get into it, you're like, hey, this is pretty good. It's great. I can put this on a Saturday morning or Sunday morning at 10 a.m. and watch a good high-level game. And I think you're seeing this appreciation for the sport of soccer, and then the MLS is kind of an up-and-coming league. Now, personally, I think their product is vastly watered down over some of that premium European soccer, but you're seeing younger people who like soccer, and the MLS experience is really good. When you go to a game at PPL Park, you're close to the field. It's fun, even though the team's not great. It's a good experience, and it's more bang for your buck than some of the other sports. And oh, by the way, as slow as soccer is, the games are over in 2 hours, and there's no commercials breaking up the action. You got 45 minutes, 45 halftime, and 45 minutes, and you're in and out in 2 hours, kind of like a college basketball game. I think that helps too, believe it or not.
The soccer's interesting because of they have young viewers. I don't know how many of them they have, but do we ever foresee a time when that soccer surpasses something, where we're talking about MLS on the radio, on your website, on your podcast, on television, in the same way that we talk about Phillies, Flyers, Sixers, Eagles?
I mean, I feel like people for a while have been saying, soccer's ready to break through. I think now more than ever that it has the chance to. Certainly, if it surpasses a sport, it would be hockey first. But it's going to take – you're going to need like the men's national team to do something really exciting one year to get everyone on board, I feel like. When the women's team is good, you see how much people grab onto it. If that's the men's team, it's going to be that times 2 or 3. And I also think you got to figure out a way to get really truly almost European level competition. Every now and then you kind of get an older player like a Beckham comes over or some other guys, and they play a few years, Henry or whatever. But when you watch an MLS game, there is a huge drop off between the English and the German and the Spanish leagues, and I don't know how you bridge that gap. I feel like that's a slow burn. So I think there's going to be more interest, and it will continue to grow. But to really surpass, it needs like a couple of big-time events and changes.
Kyle, how do younger guys in your 40 years old, what are the kids that are going to your website? How are they watching? They're not 40. Well, how are they watching the game?
27 to 32.
Right. How are they watching an NBA game? How are they watching an NFL game? I can't imagine that there's a bunch of 50-year-olds all sitting around the house only watching football. Is it – see, I look at it 2 ways. One, obviously the streaming. I get that. But I can't imagine sitting there watching the game on my phone on Sunday afternoon. It just, and believe me, I'm multitasking. I'm watching the game on a tablet. I'm watching something else on my laptop. I have the TV on, so I get all of it. But I find it weird that the average viewer, where are these 28 to 32-year-olds watching the game that the average is 42? I find that to be a little odd.
Yeah, it's interesting because
or
I
50
feel like,
for the NFL, by the way.
Yeah, and I won't pretend to speak for the youth of America, because I honestly feel like our audience is a little bit older than people might expect. Like, we don't have a lot of college kids. It's mostly like young working guys. In fact, a lot of guys just got married, just had their first kid in that late 20s, early 30 range. So I wouldn't say quite a fully. I think people 25 and under are really just accustomed to being able to watch video content. And even for you or I, the concept of watching a full football game on the phone is not, is not really a solution. And personally, I find as much as people want to talk about watching stuff on a phone, you pop in and out. But the biggest problem when you're watching something on a phone is you want to pick up your phone. You want to check Twitter
yeah.
or your email. And that's really hard. So, I think what people are doing, at least in my readership, is they're watching the games, and they're I'm on DraftKings the whole time. When the Eagles aren't playing, I'm watching Red Zone, and I'm checking my DraftKings team, or checking Twitter, or texting with people. And I think that's what's happening. You're finding people who are watching the local team, but then you're popping in and out of other games, or you're watching Red Zone, and you're really interested in fantasy. It's that dual screen experience people talk about. So. Right. Again, people are watching football. It's just that now you're a little distracted while you're doing it. But I'm sure there are, 18-year-olds out there who are just, used to watching stuff on their phones. And the other thing is, like you or I, we kind of grew up watching games around the TV. There's an entire generation of people who really, 15 years worth of kids who haven't done that. And I feel like that's what the leagues have to worry about, because they don't have that sit on a couch and watch something thing built into them. And I think that's the scary thing for sports leagues, all of them.
Does it suggest, Kyle Scott, crossingbroad.com is with us. Does it suggest to you, I know Philly's a little different, but I feel like the day of the kid growing up with dad and being a hardcore fan of a team is kind of going out the window. Like, it seems like these kids, they like Steph Curry, they're a Warriors fan. They like Durant, they're a Warriors fan. They don't care that the hometown team is here. The hometown team's no good. I like this player. That's my team. I feel like that generation is not as tied to the hometown team as maybe we were.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hand wringing over this, and definitely now the Philly sports team, the local sports teams have been so bad for the last 5 years. I think it's a little more exaggerated around here, but Philly's a unique place too, in that the minute a team is good, everyone is just fully on board. So Philly will have a slower burn in that regard. But I think what's happening is, like you said, you can watch you can become a fan of Steph Curry, and that allows you to become a fan of the Warriors, because especially in basketball, guys have so much control over. If you like Steph Curry, the Warriors are going to be good. If you like Russell Westbrook, you're automatically rooting for the Thunder. It becomes very easy to kind of attach that to teams. But I don't know. It's hard to tell around here, because I still see, when I go to the Y and play basketball, and there's a bunch of kids there shooting around, I still see more Ben Simmons jerseys than anything. So I'm not so sure that locally that's totally the case. I just think it's there hasn't been a lot for kids to latch on to now. But the minute the Sixers turn the corner, I don't think the local fandom is really going away. But yeah, I mean, the experience is probably changing and going to be a little different than what you're used to, I think.
What is on your site? What drives the needle the most? Sixers, Eagles? I'm assuming they're the top two.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
Our jobs,
the Eagles.
Our jobs, the radio stuff.
Yeah, the radio stuff does good. Especially when there's controversy or strife or something like that. But as far as the teams go, like the Eagles, if there's a big event, I would say if the team were to win the championship, what would drive the most interest? I mean, 100% that's the Eagles. But right now, an interesting Eagles story will still do well. But the Sixers are definitely the topic right now. And a couple of years ago, it was different. It was the Phillies and Flyers. So the audience has completely flipped from those two teams, and
right.
It's the Eagles are always that baseline. But right now, the Sixers are interesting. And part of that is just because there's something going on. The tank and the process was so unique, and they're rebuilding through the draft. That is really interesting to talk about. And you got this guy in Joel Embiid, who is one of the most charismatic athletes in the country. And if he could stay healthy, he's going to do wonders for basketball around here. He's going to do what Eric Lindros did for the Flyers, what Iverson did for the Sixers, and so on.
Yeah, I would imagine 2008, 9, 10. When did your blog start? About 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, unfortunately, right at the beginning, kind of the late 2009, early 2010, I missed those like two Phillies World Series runs, unfortunately.
Right. So I'm assuming, like back then, 2008, 2009, 2010, there were Phillies blogs like everywhere. Like everyone had a Phillies blog. They're like gone. There's like none. Nobody has a Phillies blog anymore, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean that is how kind of the Philly online culture started. It was all built around the Phillies, and they have just done everything in their power to wipe that slate clean.
Crazy. And back when I guess you first started, the Sixers had just got Bynum, right? So that was an exciting moment. But post Bynum had to been like trying to get someone to read a Sixers thing on your site must have been like pulling teeth.
Yeah, I mean,
it was like
Bynum,
how can
Bynum.
right? How could Darrell Wright not get more minutes? Like, when are they going to give Swaggy P a start? Like, that was like the discussion back then. It shows you that a team that won 10 games drives that much, as opposed to the mediocrity that they were before, and why this is what people like, and why that people turn their back on.
Yeah, and I think I think a generational thing happened too, where you had people glom onto this and you picked your side. Do you hate the process or do you love it? And once people are starting to see that, like, some of the fruits are coming now, it's like now people are excited. This isn't going to be a contending team next year, but there's genuine progress. Like, the Sixers are the only team locally we could look at and say there's genuine forward momentum here, and we could see a path to like actual greatness. And it takes on that feel the Phillies had in the early 2000s. I hate comparing the two because I don't think they're the same situation, but the feeling is the same. Like, you could feel something good's about to happen, and it's interesting. If nothing else, it's just interesting.
Sure is, and real interesting discussion. The Sports Business Journal, Sports Business Daily. These are the numbers: MLS 40, NBA 42, NHL 49, NFL 50, Major League Baseball 57. And PGA Tour golf, your buddies, Pete, 64.
Yeah,
that's
pretty,
where you
pretty
are.
great right there.
Kyle Scott, crossingbroad.com. And good stuff from you to give us a little new media perspective on it, pal.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.